Well, hello everybody. It is Dr. Sasheen. It has been a while, but welcome back to the podcast. So, I am foregoing my normal introduction that I have recorded, and I am doing the intro cold today. So, it's going to be a little rough, but hopefully, it'll be fine. So, why am I doing it this way? For two reasons. Number one, I've published a new book and I want to have a chance to talk about it before I get into today's episode. And number two, I just want a chance to say thank you. This is episode number 15 in season 1, and it will be the wrap for season 1. And this gives me an opportunity to say thank you for everyone who's listened to the first 15 episodes in season 1 of So You're Getting Divorced. And it's really important for me to be able to say that because this podcast is not going anywhere. I am enjoying it. Took a bit of a hiatus to get the book finished and to take care of some personal family life stuff. But this is an opportunity for me to just say thank you for sticking with me and being here when I get back. So thank you. Thank you very much. So, when I started this podcast 15 episodes ago, I was talking about the book, So You're Getting Divorced, Notes on the Journey. And I wrote that book a year ago. It's so funny. I wrote that book a year ago, and a year later, I have written my second book and published it, self-publishing it. And it is called Who Did You Love? 4 Faces of Narcissism. And it really picks up kind of where So You're Getting Divorced left off, but it really did into the question that seems to haunt a lot of women. So this episode, I'm going to talk a bit about the new book, and then I'm going to talk about the futility of non-viable choices that we have to make in certain situations. But first, there's going to be a brief word from our sponsor. Hey everybody, it's Dr. Sasheen from So You're Getting Divorced, the podcast, here to talk to you about Anchor and the ease at which you too can launch and start your own podcast. If you haven't heard about Anchor, let me just break it down for you. Here is the 411. Number 1, it's free. This is a great way to get started if you've never done podcasting, or if you're a pro and you really like the idea of using your phone or your computer to get your podcast going without all the hassle, because number 2, they will distribute it for you to places like Pocket Casts, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. That's a pretty sweet deal. Next, you can make money while you're doing your podcast with no minimum listenership, and that's pretty darn spectacular. So, follow these instructions. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Now, let's get back to the show. Okay, I'm back. All right, so let's talk about this new book that I wrote. I really want to give you a flavor of why this book was important and a little bit of the backstory, and to give you a sense of why this book has me smiling to get it out here, because I've been sitting on it for so long. So Who Did You Love? First of all, every time I say the title, I have this old R&B song in my head literally playing, and the title was Who Did You Love? And the first working title for this book was actually The Court of Fools, The 4 Faces of Narcissism. And then I realized that that really wasn't very sexy. Interesting, but not very sexy. And B, it really didn't get to the core of what I believe people always ask when they have been in a relationship with a narcissist and they're coming out of it. And the question I keep hearing is, who did I love? Like, how did I miss this person? How did I not notice these things? And so that became the title as it got closer to publication. The idea of perhaps I could help you find an answer to that question of who did you love? So I broke this down into what I call the Court of Fools. And in the book, you'll read a little bit about where that comes from. But there are these 4 levels of narcissism. And I call it the 4 faces of narcissism because one level isn't inherently less destructive than another level, but there are degrees there's shades of bad, I guess is the best way to put it. There are some shades of bad in the court of fools. And the idea here is that as you work, hopefully you never do this, but if you're working your way up the pyramid or down the pyramid, if however you choose to look at it, because it's an inverted pyramid in the book, you find yourself encountering deeper layers of narcissism to get to the thief, which is at the very point of the pyramid. And this is what I call the most destructive type of narcissist that you can encounter. And so I won't bore you with all the details in the book because I'd like for you to read it. But it starts off with crazy makers, then it goes to snipers, and then it goes to jesters, and then it goes to thieves. And this quafecta, not trifecta, but this quafecta, kind of four-sided fecta of badness, is broken down in terms of behaviors that are usually associated with this kind of person. And I try in the book to give you examples of the kind of behavior that you're probably enduring. And then I try to show you why it's not working. It's not good for you. And interspersed in it is also hope. And that's the thing I really want to stress about the first book and the second book. And really the point of this podcast, which is to give someone out there listening to my voice a sense that this does pass and you aren't crazy and you're not going to stay in a broken place forever. And you don't have to apologize for having loved someone who just turned out to be shitty. Guess I better put a warning on this particular episode. I might curse. You want to make sure that you don't listen to this if you have kids, because their ears might burn. You don't have to apologize for loving someone who turned out to be a disaster. That doesn't require you to apologize. And in season 2, I really start to shift the tone of this podcast to one of healing. And, in season 1, I really wanted to get out the basics, the foundation. In season 2, I'm really hoping to start building rooms on this mansion called Life After Divorce. And those rooms are going to look, hopefully, like a well put together house at the end of season 2 for you to have moved into, set up shop, and called your own. But I digress. So, as the book is my attempt to bring some hope, it is smattered with quotes from people I find to be very helpful in my own journey and who I believe impart a sense of hope and closure and, possibility for what's to come, even as you're cleaning up the mess on aisle 5 of what is at the moment. So the book is really my attempt to say, whoever you loved, it's okay. It's time to work through some of those issues of who you love, but it's also time to start recognizing that these moments no longer have to define you. They no longer have to be how you tell your story. They can be something else. They can be a shift away from this being who you were. Because part of Who Did You Love, the book, is an attempt to say, this may be who you loved, but this doesn't have to be the last person that you love. And if you can unpack this baggage and take from it the lessons, because after all, there are lessons in everything, good and bad, and take from it the lessons, then you just don't have to go into the next relationship with a warehouse full of luggage that you've never unpacked, turning that relationship into a battleground for issues that they didn't see coming. And that happens all too often, especially when people jump straight into relationships post-divorce or post any kind of significant breakup, especially when they are coming off a relationship with a narcissist, because many people don't want to heal themselves. They want someone else to come along and heal them for themselves. And they really hope that in the process, they will learn to like themselves again and to love themselves again. And the real issue comes when they haven't faced what they've been through or who they loved, and they look for that person again and they find them. Never fails, right? We find that person who did us terrible if we haven't taken the time to realize what they did and acknowledge that it was bad and then work through it and then grow and then grow. So that is the new book, Who Did You Love? 4 Faces of Narcissism. The Court of Fools beckons you to come in and read about them and hopefully not see yourselves in the pages as the person who is the narcissist. But if you do, then this is a good time to look in the mirror and ask yourself if this is who you want to continue to be. Because I don't think that you do, or else you wouldn't be listening to this podcast. All right, we're going to shift gears now and talk about this final episode. Season 1, episode 15 is all about non-viable choices. So back in March, I was driving and I had this epiphany after having a conversation with a good friend of mine about the choices that we have to make in the midst of a divorce, in the midst of any kind of major life transition, but especially at the breakup of a relationship. And a lot of those options I would consider as non-viable options. And what do I mean by that? Non-viable options are options or choices that we have to do in the moment because we are caught between a rock and a hard place. And when you are coming out of a divorce, even if you have all the resources in the world at your disposal, you still have to make a lot of choices immediately that aren't necessarily good for the long term, but they'll get you through the moment. They'll get you over the hump. They get things done, and they may be messy and they may be make you critically crazy, but they have to be made. They simply have to be made. And the reason that I say that they're non-viable is because they're not long-term. They shouldn't, and this is going to be important, they shouldn't have staying power. They should only be necessary to help you get from point A to point B. They are not the choices that you make to help you get from point A to point Z. And they're definitely not the choices that you make so that you never get to point Z, but that you stay stuck on point A. Viable choices, viability, the things that keep us going, the things that give us a future, those are the kind of choices that we need to be making concurrently with our non-viable choices as much as we can. So here is an example of a non-viable choice that a lot of women especially, but some men have to make as they're going through the transition of divorce or separation. Where do you live? That's a choice that you have to make. And for some people, it becomes I have to temporarily relocate to a smaller home. I have to go stay with family or friends. You might end up in a hotel. You might end up in your car. You might end up in a number of places. If you have kids, that adds another layer to where you might end up. And you have to make some choices. And sometimes these are non-viable choices. You have to make a choice. You need a place to stay today. You pick the apartment, the house, you make the phone call that puts you on somebody's couch or in somebody's basement, or you get the apartment in the not so great part of town, or you leave her the house and you take yourself and sleep in your office because you don't really know what else to do because you had to make a choice. You had to do something, and a choice and a solution that you made in the moment. Again, non-viable solutions or choices are the ones that you have to do in the moment because you are caught between a rock and a hard place. Well, there's nothing more rock and hard place than having to leave your home. And so that's a non-viable solution. Now, here's the rub. You make that choice in the moment, but you don't live that choice for the next 6, 8, 10, 12, 15, 24, 28, 3-year, keep going months, right? You make the choice in the moment because you had no choice. But once the dust settles, and it's got to settle pretty quickly, especially if you have kids, you start looking at viable options. And all too often, in the midst of a divorce, it can be really easy to just sit with the non-viable and say, excuse my language out there, but fuck it. I'm just going to coast from one emotion to the next, from one choice to the next, and I'm not going to think too far ahead because I don't know what's coming. and I'm too tired to think about it, and I'm too scared about what I don't know. That will keep you in non-viable solutions for years to come. That will keep you in one bad apartment after the next bad apartment. That will keep you couch surfing as opposed to figuring out where you want to go next. Excuse me. That will keep you bouncing from job to job to job, from relationship to relationship to relationship. That will keep you bouncing like a yo-yo, in essence, because you won't be able to make any real headway when all the options before you are always made between that rock and that hard place. There at some point, you have to blow up the rock and the hard place to find a better road. And so you have to start thinking about the viable choices that you want to make, that you hope to have. So you might end up in the little apartment in a little town in the middle of some random state because you just had to move, but you don't have to stay there. Now, I know that for some, there are I can't move, there are obstacles in my way to the thing that I want. The only obstacle that you need to worry about is the one you can do something about. The only obstacle that you need to worry about is the one that you can actually do something about. So if your non-viable living situation that you had to do because you were between a rock and a hard place can't get any better if you stay in the place where you are, the state, the city, the town, then you've got to start thinking about moving to a different state, city, or town, so that you give yourself access to viable solutions, to viable options, to a better life than the one that's constantly being lived between a rock and a hard place. By moving to some place that gives you viable solutions, then you can make better choices, which lead to more solutions and opportunities, which lead to more and more choices and opportunities. And you start to get this domino effect of the good stuff that you want to have happen because you are in a place of viability. You're in a place where your choices actually sustain you, as opposed to the non-viable choices and solutions, which don't sustain you and are constantly needing to be made again and again. Because what do we know about living between a rock and a hard place? You just get squeezed. You're just constantly feeling the pressure of that moment. And for those of you who are out there who are going, I can barely get through the moment. I can't even think about 6 months down the road. I would say this: you have to start thinking about 6 months down the road, or this moment just doesn't end. It just never ends. It doesn't go away. And so when you're sitting in the midst of a rock and a hard place, you also have to think about how do I want this to look in 6 months? And unless you've been placed in a position, I'll be very delicate how I phrase this. Unless you have been placed in a position where your life, your physical body, your emotional body, your life is in danger, it may be difficult to think about 6 months down the road. It may be devastating if your marriage of 22 years has ended and you are now left trying to even understand what it means to be single again, to be on your own. Even if that's the place that you're coming from, that moment can allow you to sit with it and be stuck there, but you still have to start thinking about the future. You still have to think about the future. What's next? Where do we go from here? Where do I go from here? Because the reality is you can stay stuck in the squeeze of a beautiful home that used to be ours, that's now big and empty and expensive, but I'm going to stay here because I don't know what else to do. And that squeeze, that pressure between that rock and that hard place that you now find yourself in, that will be the death of you, emotionally, physically, and probably financially. Because let's face it, for a lot of people, divorce brings a serious shift in their financial house. Now, it doesn't have to be devastating if you realize that choices made in the moment do not have to be the choice that you make in the next moment. And you can always revisit a choice that you've made. And maybe non-viable becomes a viable option. Maybe that non-viable choice to take that job temporarily in 2 states over because you needed a job, because you had to work, because you've got to take care of yourself and you've got to take care of your kids. And now all of a sudden you are fast tracked into this job and you are making good money. And boom, what you thought was a non-viable, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to relocate for the next 6 months. And, I don't know what's going to happen, but I can do this temporarily. Now you're like, well, hang on a minute. I'm actually doing something over here that I wasn't expecting that I was going to be doing. And I'm no longer between a rock and a hard place because this non-viable solution that I chose because I just had to have a job has turned out to be the best thing that I could have done for my sanity. By removing myself from that process physically and moving over to this other place, I'm actually getting clear, getting better, feeling stronger. So that yes, I might be getting a divorce or going through a separation or putting my life back together, but I'm also becoming happy again, becoming valuable to myself again, feeling good about where I am in the world and my contribution to the world. So when we think about the stress of non-viable solutions, being caught between that rock and that hard place and how much pressure is on us. And chances are we've been in that pressure situation for a while if our marriage or relationship is on the rocks. If we realize that the more we can make decisions that are viable, that are life-giving, that are affirming, that allow us to move forward, our stress levels begin to drop. The stress of living between a rock and a hard place begins to dissipate when you blow up the rock and the hard place and you go, okay, enough of that. Enough. I'm ready for something else. I'm ready to move on. It's time. And I actually I was following Cardi B. I want to mention her name and I hope I don't get sued, but it was public knowledge. She filed for divorce from her husband, Offset. And one of the things that she said was she had done all of her crying. She was not going to come out in public and lament what was already done. She had already lived her non-viable options. She was done with the non-viable options. The non-viable option was to stay married. And as she said, I chose to move on from the person that that obviously I can no longer stay married to, but I've done that grieving work. And this is the thing I want to really respect women for, who are able to, now that I'm going to disrespect those who aren't there yet, but I also think that women who are able to say, this marriage is over and I'm fine. We give a lot of side eye to, and we want to say, well, maybe she wasn't really in love, or maybe their marriage wasn't really very strong, but my marriage was really strong and I'm devastated. You don't know anyone else's devastation, but I want to give a lot of props to her because she said, and I quote, if I stayed with him in this situation, you would blast me for staying. The fact that I'm walking with my head held up, I know that it's time, and I'm ready to go, and I'm good with going, and I'm still getting blasted, but at least I know it's time. This is a woman who was probably faced with a lot of non-viable choices for a long time, and we can hear it through her music, and who in the end decided that the viable solution to her non-viable situation with a cheating spouse was to move on, but not to move on until she was ready to put it all behind her, so that the next steps that she could take were steps in viability, steps that would take her further and move her on at a rapid pace so that she could just leave it behind her. Now, is she the blueprint? For some of us, she is the blueprint. For others, it's going to take more time. But either way, it's important to recognize that you cannot continue to make decisions about your life from a place of non-viable choices. When you are stuck in a non-viable choice, there are things that you should be thinking about at all times, which is, when does this end? So how quickly can I move out of this decision that I'm going to have to make? Because number 2, it has to be temporary. It cannot be permanent. And if it's going to be permanent, I got to find a way to make it viable. I have to find a way to make this not between a rock and a hard place, not so stressful because I just had to do something and this was the only thing that I could do because this is a choice that I had. I got to move that so it's not really worse than where I was at some point. And finally, what's my end date? Whether it's because it comes to an end or because I have to shift it to viability. I got to put a date on this so that I don't get stuck on the hamster wheel of non-viable choices as they come rolling one after the other, because as we know, bad choices beget bad choices. And when we're in it between a rock and a hard place, we tend to make some really bad choices, not because we want to, but because we have to. We end up doing things that we don't want to do, but we have no choice, or at least we feel we just have no choice. And that's fine. I'm not knocking that. But what I am saying is when you're in that place, you've got to give yourself these 3 points. Number 1, this is temporary. Period. I will not stay here. Number 2, this is short term. It's short term. I don't give this 6 months, a year, 18 months, 24 months. There's an end date and I set it. Now you can't set a shifting goal line and go, okay, this is 3 weeks. Be realistic. I'm going to need to work this I'm going to need to drive Uber for 3 months, but I can't drive Uber for more than 3 months because I also have to pay for childcare for 3 months, and driving Uber for 3 months and having to get a sitter. You see how these non-viable options begin to just snowball and they become bigger and the hole gets deeper. So I'm going to say I can drive Uber for 3 months. In 3 months, I got to find something else. I have got to be, every time I'm not in the car picking up a person, I am on Indeed or Monster, or I'm at the FEC, the Full Employment Council, or I'm on USA.jobs.gov, or I'm enrolling in school, or I'm getting packed up because we're moving across the country and we're gone in 3 months and I'm going to save every dime that I have because we're out. Whatever the case may be, that non-viable choice that you have to make has to have an end date. You have to have the mindset that it is temporary and that it is short term. It does not get any longer and any more of my attention than it absolutely needs to get me from point A to point B, because all of my other choices have got to get me from point A to point Z, all the way down to the end of the alphabet, not just the next letter over. So, in conclusion, in the grand scheme of divorce and separation, probably the hardest thing to navigate are these non-viable choices, these non-viable solutions to immediate problems. So many of them have to be made that we can sometimes lose track of what's important because we're just trying to survive. And survival is fine, but it's temporary. If you get stuck in survival mode, that is where you will be when the next relationship finds you. You'll still be surviving, and you will meet someone who is also just surviving. And the two of you together will survive in a non-viable way. And so you find yourself once again in the untenable position to have to make choices that you don't want to have to make for a life that you did not intend to live because you did not decide where you were going and how long it was going to take you to get there. In the end, I hope that you've learned something valuable out of these 15 episodes, and I hope that you have found solace in some ways with the things that we've been talking about. Next season, oh my gosh, so much good stuff. And it starts almost immediately. So season 1 is ending, but season 2 is right on tap. It's debuting before the end of the month, I believe, right around Halloween. If not sooner, might even be sooner. Yeah, might even be sooner because we're mid-month in. Whew, forgot about that. We're mid-month in. But it has been the joy of my life to do these podcasts. They have been fun. I have enjoyed them. I can't wait for season 2. I have so much more to talk about, so much more to say, and so much more, I hope, support to offer out there in listener land to everyone who listens and who just needs someone to tell them that they're okay and that this too shall pass. You are okay, and this too shall pass. So thank you, everyone. Again, the new book is out. Who Did You Love? 4 Faces of Narcissism is available on Amazon. I have an Amazon authors page, Dr. Sasheen Mobley. So please pick up a copy and let me know what you think. And this is the final episode for season 1 of So You're Getting Divorced. I will see you in season 2. Take care, everybody. Have a good night or a good day, depending on when you listen to it. And that, as they say, is the tea. It's been Dr. Sasheen here at So You're Getting Divorced, the podcast. If you like what you hear, please support us on any place that you find your podcast, whether that's iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Castbox, Anchor, you name it, we're there. Also, catch more content on Facebook at www.facebook.com/Dr. Sasheen and pick up the book, So You're Getting a Divorce, on Amazon today, which you can find the link to that in the show notes. Thanks again for listening. Have a great week.